Welcome, everyone, to How Coronavirus Saved My Life podcast, episode 23, The Stigma. Thank you for coming to join us. Today's topic is mental health stigma in the Black community. The purpose of today's show is finding solutions to mental health stigma in the Black community. I am honored and humbled to have three mental health experts to discuss and educate people on this topic so that we can help the community find solutions. Before I introduce my esteemed panel of mental health experts, I would like to introduce myself and give some background of what drew me to mental health and why it's important for me to be a part of this discussion. My name is Zethraus. I have been a mental health nurse practitioner for over 10 years. I am the podcast host of How Coronavirus Saved My Life. My podcast is about my journey of getting coronavirus back in April of 2020, then having long COVID symptoms, and couldn't figure out why I wasn't healing until I healed myself through unwinding my childhood conditioning. My first memory at 4 years old was one of violence. It was Thanksgiving. My father was running around with no shirt on, high on drugs, drunk, while my mother was banging on the door, screaming my name, asking for him to let me out. He wouldn't let me out. He looked at me and said, "If you open that door, I'm gonna shoot your mother in the head." And there was a shotgun and a baseball bat by the front door. This was my first memory at 4 years old, and ironically, on Thanksgiving. My father was racist. He said the N-word my entire life. Not just the N-word, but he would use dumb or stupid right before he would say that. I didn't even know what the word meant, but I just knew how my body reacted. The people who raised me were horrible to me and scary, the people who looked like me. So I was raised in an environment of uncertainty and anxiety. The very first time I ever felt love and felt safety was the very first time I ever went to an all-Black church at 14 years old. When I walked in, everybody was so loving and kind, and how ironic from the people that my dad had misguided hatred towards. So these are the reasons why I am drawn to mental health and why spotlighting Black issues are important to me. So thank you so much to my esteemed panel for coming to my show and talking about mental health stigma in the Black community. My first guest is Miss Adris, your Class C therapist. Adris, can you tell everyone a little bit about your background and what drew you to mental health?
Awesome, thank you. And that was well said, Christine. I think it was very touching.
Thank you.
My name is Adris, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And honestly, my first major when I originally was going in college was education. And because I come from a family of educators. And so when I was going in education, I wanted to help children in a different capacity. And so I switched my major and went to social work. And part of that reason why I went into social work is because some of my upbringing wasn't the walk in the park. And, I had behavioral problems in school. And I can never forget when I was in 7th grade, because I stayed in the principal office, by the way. And then the principal tells me, he said, "Adris, you're going to be a social worker." I said, "Nah, I don't want to be no social worker. I don't want to deal with people's problems all day." He said, watch and you'll see. You're going to be a social worker." I said, "Nah, I'm not going to do that. That's not for me." And then I'll never get that same principal. One of the very few field trips I could go on, I went on a field trip, and of course I wasn't following directions. I am getting left. And so he ended up having to drive me in his Corvette back to the school. And I remember he was driving and everything. And I was riding with him. He was saying, I said, "I want to get one of these fancy cars one day." He said, "You will get these fancy cars one day, Adrius. And anything you put your mind to, you'll be able to accomplish it." And back then, a lot of times people can prophesize to you and tell you things. And until now, as an adult, everything he said has become true. And so the reason why I was drawn to mental health was because I tells you no, and people tell you no, and you fall down, to give them reasons to be able to get back up again. Because I can relate to that. And that experience, I feel like, can be able to help me and help other people and help my clients. And a little bit about me, I have a counseling agency here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area where we provide a wide range of counseling services. And that's a little bit about me.
I love that story. That is so true. I mean, that childhood programming starts so early. I mean, from the time we were born, the things that we hear, not just from our own parents, but from society. And then, children, they learn not really through words, through behaviors. And so if you could give the greatest speech in the whole wide world, but if you're not walking the walk, the kid's not going to do it, so that is just beautiful. And I love that you are now like a role model in your family, your community, and you're changing the game. That's just awesome. I love that, Adris.
Despite what people told me I couldn't.
Exactly. You need a bumper sticker that says that on your Corvette. All right. And Danny, my esteemed panel number 2. Danny, there are so many things. I mean, I could probably do 20 slides on all of your accomplishments. I was like, this is overwhelming. This man has done a lot. And so will you tell everybody a little bit about your background? I know we could probably do a whole hour on everything that you've done. But a little bit about background, and why are you passionate about mental health? What drew you to mental health?
Hi, I'm Danny Ross. I'm a licensed professional counselor supervisor. And one of my reasonings for being so adamant about mental health and making sure that people get mental health is because I was a youngster and mental health was not talked about. We didn't say we needed help. We went to church, and if church didn't offer it, hey, you just on your own. And so it took me going to get my master's in college to realize that I wasn't crazy, as we call it in my family system. You're crazy if you can't handle life on your own. You're crazy if you can't handle this, or you're just weak. And so for me, I've come to recognize that Black men have been given a bad taste when it comes to counseling and therapy and what it looks like. And we've also been told that we don't get an opportunity to talk about our feelings, and we don't get safe places to be vulnerable. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was make communication, counseling very accessible, very easy to do. Not that I'm trying to get into your head or anything, but I wanted to introduce it more so as conversation. And I wanted guys in particular to see the benefits of going to counseling and working through some of the stuff that's been programmed that probably is not oftentimes true. We just kind of continue it because it's something we know. I use a technique called transaction analysis theory. So a lot of times there are different egos. We have the parent ego, we have the child ego, and we have the adult ego. And oftentimes the child ego is told who or what that person is to become based on what the parent ego tells them. A lot of times the parent ego has so many distortions of their own and ideas that are not true. And then we're selling these to our youngster, and our youngster does not, the youngster becomes an adult and they're carrying out that same mission, the same ideas about how to deal with life, how to deal with relationships, and which some are just really messed up. And so I think in counseling sessions, I have been able to help men particularly, and even just Black families, recognize that you don't have to keep acting out as the child. You don't have to keep trying to get permission and approval. But what we want you to do is to move to a place of adult to where you're comfortable making your own decisions, living your own life, doing what you're supposed to do for you. And we're not dependent upon our parents, who can be anyone, telling us who we are. But I'm confident in my own adult abilities. And I get to move to that place to where I'm just not acting out, but I'm living as an adult in my decision making. So I've had an opportunity to write a couple of books. Most of them are connected to messaging and things of that nature. Some on parenting, one is on grief and loss, another is on, oh, just in general, just the messages we keep and how they can shape and harm us. Oh, and I did one specifically for Black men, the messages we carry. So got a couple of things.
I love that, Danny. I love that. It sounds like, particularly with like Black men, they're sort of taught, ingrained to shut down their feelings at a very young age. Like it like have that avoidant attachment in relationship styles. Yeah, I'm very familiar with that. And dating and stuff like that. It's when I learned about attachment styles, and especially the avoidant type, I just found that so, I mean, it's so sad. I mean, why are, so is it just, it's just like ingrained, like why are they taught to shut down their feelings?
Well, I think part of it is cultural. You go back historically to slavery. A lot of times we did not have opportunities to share how we felt. Yeah. So some of that stuff is ingrained in our bellies and is transferred generationally to, we exercise what we didn't have. We exercise what we were taught. And I think subconsciously, a lot of that stuff is exercised and retaught. And instead of challenging some of those things, we just keep passing it along.
Yes,
so I love this panel because we're getting an opportunity to crack some stuff open and saying, you don't have to live like this. This is not the norm. And you can do something about it. So I'm very, very passionate about that.
Yeah. It's time to break the generational curse. It's time to change up the DNA and heal that stuff. Thank you so much. And Mr. Jared Denzel, I just love your Instagram. You're a mental health advocate. You have your own story and your own journey, like a lot of us, but a lot of people don't share theirs. So tell us, our audience, a little bit about your background and why it's important that you share your story and why it's important to you to reducing and finding solutions to mental health stigma in the Black community.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me, Christina. I'm very excited to be here. So I want to say, first of all, I don't have a million degrees or licenses or all these other things. I am not a therapist. I'm just a regular old person, but I've been through a lot of crazy things in my life. And I feel like I'm very comfortable with talking about it. And through that, I have helped and hope to help even more people. Like my main goal is to normalize conversations around mental health. Because like Danny was saying, as Black people, but especially as Black men, that's just not something we do. Like we just don't talk about feelings. Like daddy's cold, granddaddy was cold. That's just how they were. And like you end up taking on a lot of that yourself. But because I grew up as a gay Black kid in the South, I was ostracized in a lot of different ways. In all of the ways I was ostracized, I didn't really fit in. And that can really mess with your mind. And I think in high school, it sent me into a state of depression. But at that time, I just thought I was sad. Like I didn't even know what depression was. We didn't talk about it. We were real churchy, like how Danny was saying. So it was like, pray to Jesus and Jesus will fix it all. If he does it, then oh, well, I don't know what to tell you. So when I got into like my late 20s, I actually started taking depression medication because it got really bad. But I've always been open with it person to person. But then last August 2021, my friend and roommate, we had lived together for 3 years, Garrett, he died by suicide. We moved out, moved in end of July. I moved to DC, he moved to Atlanta. Like 3 weeks after we moved away from each other, I got a call at dinner saying that he had died by suicide. And I had no clue. Like Gary was quintessential, on top of the world, was a flight attendant, had a huge personality, all these things. So when I found out that he passed away, like that really shook me. And I remember feeling a lot of guilt because there were times where I could have talked to him about what was going on with me and I just didn't, either for embarrassment or not wanting to share it or whatever. And I remember after he passed away, I was like, you could have helped him. Y'all could have helped each other because clearly you were both going through the same thing. So after that happened, I decided to start using my social media and just talking about everything that I've been through, like my depression, my anxiety, suicide ideation, issues with drugs. I've had a lot of issues that you can tell, but like I just decided to start being open with it. Because when I started talking more, I saw a lot of other people also have a lot of issues. We just act like we're fine all the time.
Yes.
And like
Yeah.
that's been the goal, is to try to like normalize the conversation around this. And that's what's drawn me to what I feel like honestly is my purpose in life, is to just be as open as possible about it.
Awesome.
I
Beautiful.
love
Did I answer all the
that.
questions? Sorry. I feel like, did I
I
answer
love
the
that.
question, Christine?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I have a million more, sorry.
Okay.
But yes, I totally, because like my childhood, the things that it did to me, the effects was like procrastination, perfectionism, anxiety attacks, panic attacks, to the point when I was like around 19, I couldn't even drive a car because I was so scared.
Oh no.
But I wanted, and I'm really sorry about your roommate. The thing is like depression, it's like a spectrum, right? Like we all have bias of what depression should look like, right? Like depression is not always just, I'm in bed, I can't eat, I'm not getting out. You can be totally functioning, going to work, and have depression, right?
Right. Yep. Because I was functioning, like I was still able to get up and go to things. And if you saw me out, you wouldn't really know. But then I would also have days where I wouldn't shower for like 3 days, or brush my teeth, or eat. Like all I would do was just like sit in bed and like stare at the wall.
Yep. And let me ask you this, because this was actually a question I was kind of thinking about before this. How did everyone react? Was your roommate Black?
Yeah, he was.
How did the Black community, your community, I mean, and maybe I could ask this to everyone, how do they react when someone commits suicide?
I mean, for everyone that knew Gary, it was shocking. What I've noticed always happens after the fact, it's like, oh, I should have reached out and I should have said this and this and that. But like when they were here, we didn't really foster a type of community where he would feel comfortable talking about that if he wanted to. Like, because I remember one time after, what was the young lady's name that didn't go to the Olympics? Simone Biles, I believe, didn't go. She decided to sit out. And I remember us sitting in the living room with him and like a few other friends, and then being like, she got anxiety, she got mental health issues, like she got all this money and she got this, why can't she blah, blah, blah? And it's like, that's why we don't talk about it. Because when people do try to, that's what they're met with. Like you should be more open and understanding of where they're coming from.
Right.
And then like, I know that like some people feel like they get to the end of the rope and suicide is the only solution, but I do feel like if we had a community where people were more comfortable talking about things, you would probably see it downtick at least a little bit. Because people would get it off their chest.
Yes, because like statistics show, the more support you have, the better you're going to do, and better you're going to do with any sort of mental health diagnosis. I mean, Adris, you and I see it with our population. A lot of, at the county hospital, a lot of our clients, you know, are homeless and have burned bridges and all that. But when you have someone that has a community that wraps their arms around them and is supportive and talk, they just do so much better. They're on less medication. I mean, they usually can work. I mean, they're functioning. And so, and what I heard you say is like, there's like this judgment, you know, that happens. It's like, and I wonder, is it because like people are just, that's how people's reaction is, because it's not the norm and it's uncomfortable, or is that what it is? Danny, what do you think?
I think so much of it is, it's just connected to a lot of different things. And one of the things when we were just talking about dying by suicide, I think about just the complication of the grief.
Right.
You have grief. There are certain things we can talk about easily. You know, he died by cancer. He died by this or that. But when you talk about certain types of death, there's a shame connected to it. Because what we tell ourselves in our community, oh, he should have been able to, I should have been able to, blah, 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 versus it being like, why don't we have this communication, we work at this communication thing early on. And I come out of the school system, and so much of what I see now is a lack of cultivation of skills, social skills. You know, what we're seeing now with COVID-19
Yeah.
is because kids have their games, they have their friends, and when those things weren't easily accessible to them, those things were those kids' friends. Those were the things that kept those kids entertained. And so when we talk about family, the kids that I work with, they didn't look at their family as family. So it's things like that that we really need to be made aware of. Like, just because you live in a house together does not necessarily mean y'all are family and things are
Ooh,
going
child,
well.
That's
yes.
true. Yes, that's true.
Do we know
Okay.
how to check in with each other? Can I actually talk to you about how I feel? Can I?
Yes.
My dad died when I was about 5. And I tell people all the time, generally your first experience is how you deal with future experiences, particularly grief and loss. Well, I just knew when my mama wasn't crying, my family members weren't crying, nobody talked about it. I did not know nobody ever told me my dad was dead.
Wow.
I share this because this is how our community works a lot of times. You just get it through osmosis.
You just don't talk about it.
Just don't talk about it. And
Wow.
like,
And so, yeah. And so like with my experience, the way I was raised, like I have a daughter and I had to teach myself how to connect with your child because no one connected. I mean, the connection was violence, you know? So I had to like teach myself how to connect with my child, like just certain little things like making eye contact with her when she's talking, stopping what you're doing and just like really have quality time and give, do y'all know that you're like to thrive in life, you're supposed to get 12 hugs a day. So like just little things like that, Yeah. So,
Lord, I'm thriving, I think.
yeah, I don't think I've been hugged today, so I'm sorry. But Adris, you and I had a very interesting conversation the other day when we were talking about mental health in the Black community and the stigma, and then wrapped up with religion.
Yes.
So can we speak a little bit about that? You were saying that people say that God, you said God is the source and therapy is the resource, right?
Yeah, I saw a post like that, which because in the Black community, our faith in the Black community itself, as in the Black church, is a whole community within itself. And so we've always talked about, you go and having a bad day, you talk to somebody, everybody responds is just pray about it. The Lord gonna guide you. Just let the Lord lead you, and let him guide you. And so a lot of times we're not really, when we have issues, it's not really accepted to talk about it, but to pray about it and bring it to the church. So I think one of the things that could really improve in the Black community is having these churches talk about mental health, providing the resource, because our faith is important to a lot of us, but we need to tie the two together.
Yes.
Because it's, I agree about praying and things, but in the same sense, I think that therapy and resources, all those things help us as a whole, not just the church.
Yeah.
I think if you put those two together, you can really find some great things happening.
Yes. I did an episode with my friend Sandra where we're talking about codependency in the African American community and how it's derivative of, when they were enslaved, and religion was part of that, is what gave the hope, right?
Yes.
To your ancestors. So it's like, that's not the only thing though, right? Like you can get hope in other places. That's what kept you alive, the codependency and the religion. But also too, there was like some brainwashing by the white masters of what you could only learn because, they didn't know how to read or write. They were taught only things to keep mentally, enslaved basically. And so now it's like all ingrained and in the ancestral stuff. And so, so I love what you said about, because my thought is like, well, how can we break that cycle? And it literally means to be kind of done through the churches. How do we get the churches to start talking about mental health?
I think we have to reframe it, and I'm always about reframing it, because you may have to name it something different from mental health therapy to get, the church involved.
I like that.
But, maybe you want to have a group every Friday where you talk about feelings and how you feel about life. But I think it has to be like anything else. You integrate it into regular life, like different communities, different parts of the church, the usher board, the food committee. We address mental health issues in those different areas of the church, and not make it something to where they have to go get a whole bunch of training. But we normalize talking about our feelings. I think it's so telling. I wrote this quote in a paper before, and it says, "We don't have time to be sad or depressed because we have too many things we have to deal with right now."
Mhm.
And that's from Dr. Washington. Another one says, "White people can afford to be human, be vulnerable, seek mental health care. Black people can't," states Dr. Coleman. And so for me, this is really telling as to a lot of stuff that is ingrained in us as Black people, as to you should be able to just get over this. And if it hasn't caused you, a whole bunch of chaos in your life, it's not time to go to therapy.
Right.
We have to reintroduce that. We go to therapy before things get out of hand.
Yes. It's preventative too.
It's preventative.
Yeah.
It's preventative.
So, Jared, was that your experience? Like things had to get bad before you could get help or talk about it? I mean.
Now, see, I was always different. I didn't believe in being on the verge of having a breakdown before you finally go to therapy, or like losing your damn mind before you decide to go talk to somebody.
I love it.
I think in a lot of ways, I think because I was always different, like I said, like being gay and growing up down south, I was always a little different. So I always kind of marched to the beat of my own drum. And I remember as I got older, when I started going through feelings of depression again, I remember saying like, this sucks. Like, this fucking sucks. Like, I don't want to feel like this all the time. And if going to a therapist or trying depression medication will make that better, then yeah, I'm going to try it. Like, I never was that person that was like, no, I've got it all together. And I'm sure, because I know I'm a hot mess. So I'm not going to act like I'm fine all the time if I'm not. Like, that's not helping anybody. Certainly not helping yourself.
Can I ask Jared a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Jared, I wanted to know, what was your experience growing up and being introduced to mental health? Did your family did they normalize it, or was it always something there, or you just normalized it for yourself?
There was nothing there at all. My experience was very similar to yours, Christine. Like, my dad, when I was in high school, we used to fight down to the ground. And I don't mean no shoving. I mean, like, I used to swing on my dad like he was somebody that owed me money. And the thing is, like, I say it in a funny way because you kind of sometimes have to find humor in harmful things, because that's what makes it easy to take on. But that is what happened, and it did mess my mind up. Now, there were no conversations around mental health. When I was younger, mental health to me now feels like a bit of a buzzword. I don't even remember people saying this when I was a kid. I don't remember that word at all, or that combination of words. So it wasn't something that we talked about. It really was when I moved to New York City and honestly got out the South and kind of saw all these different types of life and all people doing this and that. I was like, okay, life is bigger than what I knew growing up. Yes. So that's what kind of made me start looking more into mental health and seeing a therapist. And then also it's helpful when you have other people around you that are open to it too. Because that's honest, if I'm being honest, that's kind of what started getting me to go to it. I actually started going to a friend's therapist because he was going. He was like, I can recommend someone to you. And a lot of my other friends were going because we all had similar backgrounds. Like, most of us, like, parents didn't go to college. First generation college students was trying to make it and had done well for ourselves in spite of everything that happened. But it was like, you wanted to get over that other hump of like, yeah, financially I'm well, but now let's work on this too. Because we all knew with some of the shit that we had been through as kids growing up, that wasn't normal. I knew I shouldn't be fighting my dad. I knew that wasn't normal. Now I need to unpack that and figure that out. And I had a lot of other friends that had that exact same scenario. Mama was doing this, daddy was doing that. They knew it wasn't normal, so they wanted to fix it. And that's kind of what pushes you towards it.
That's awesome.
But there was nothing. We didn't talk about that as kids at all.
I agree. I think that I can piggyback on what he's saying too. I think it's just not talked about. And when it's not talked about, it's not understood. So when people are having these symptoms or talking about how they're feeling, and the response is just pray about it, instead of saying just pray about it, we should be asking questions about it.
I agree.
Because when we don't talk about it, that's where shame lives, like, right?
Yeah.
So shame only has power if you don't talk about it. So it's like this whole shame thing. So I think part of one of the solutions is getting people to realize there's not shame. And actually shame leads to more depression, I'm sure more higher suicide rates, and more, suckiness, So I think talking about it, taking the shame will take the shame, part of the shame out. So let me ask you this, Adris. We also had this conversation the other day. How did your family react when they knew that you were pursuing a career in mental health?
Oh, the response was, that's a white person thing. You gonna sit there and deal with crazy people all day?
Yep.
It's crazy. In a Black community, it's a white person thing. We're always taught what happens in the family stays in the family. Talk outside of the family.
That's some family secret.
Because if you talk out, it's bringing shame.
Yeah.
Don't embarrass the family name. And a lot of time, I think that too in our community, if somebody was back in the day, they'll say that they're just not right. They're just not right, or they slipped something in their drink. And so, if one person was labeled as crazy, then the family was crazy. So it's just something you didn't talk about. We just, if you knew they were kind of off or had issues, you wouldn't say they were mentally ill. You just kind of say there's a little off.
Yeah. How did you react when your family reacted that way?
I mean, honestly, I was okay with it, because it's like I knew what I wanted to do, what I was destined to do. And now they see the great work that I'm doing. And now now people are more in the Black community, kind of somewhat getting a little more familiar with mental health. So now they're okay with it. But at first, no, they weren't on board with that.
How long do you think it's taken? How many years would you say it's taken them to be okay with it?
To like recently.
Yeah. So you got a TikTok? So you got a TikTok now, we're okay.
Yeah.
Everything's okay. We got a TikTok.
Yeah. Probably the last year, about the last couple of years.
Gotcha. Jared, how has your family reacted with all your social media boldness and talking about your story? How have they reacted?
Actually the reaction's been really good. It is bridged the gap between especially me and my parents, because for a long time, me and my dad did not have a good relationship. And now my father acknowledges the fact that I'm gay. And that's not there was one time where he hated and it was outwardly bad. Then it kind of went to, we just didn't talk about it, to now the fact that he acknowledges is those are big steps. But it has helped quite a bit. And even with my parents and some of the healing that they've had to do in regards to their parents, because at this point, all of my grandparents have passed away. So they still had some conflicted emotions because they also had very hectic childhoods. And so me talking a little bit more about mine has opened them up to talking more about theirs. I've had aunts that have reached out. I had one aunt actually a few weeks ago called me and told me that she too had been struggling with depression. And I never knew that, because she was hardworking, made money, had a husband, all that. And she told me about that. I've had other people reach out to me. It's been shockingly good. I thought it was going to be really bad, but it hasn't been. But at the same time, I've also just chosen not to give a fuck whether they like it or not. This is something that I want and that I talk about. And if you're with it, that's fine. And if you're not, that's fine too.
I mean, so have you been that way? You're since the day we're born, 0 F's given. I mean, seriously, where did you get that from?
Always kind of been like that, but I feel like I keep harping on this, but I think me being gay, because I was never normal or fit in to what they wanted me to be. So I was well, if I'm not gonna fit in, then I'm just gonna be all out, and I'm gonna just say and talk and do. That's what made me move to New York City. That's what made me be so open about being a gay man. But it's also what has pushed along my advocacy, because it's I don't care. I live out loud. So if this is what I'm going through, I'm going to talk about it, and everybody can either I don't know, deal with it or not.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it. What about you, Danny? How did your family react? I mean, you've been in this business for a while and done a lot of things. How did your family react when you were starting your like mental health career journey?
I think it's interesting. Like, I never took their opinions on much of anything. And I don't mean that to be, it's just the fact you have to know what you were created to do, because I started going against what was typical Mississippi early in my life. I knew it was a world out here. I knew it was a world that I needed to see more of. And my family's, they're very educated, but I call it educated with what you know. Like, we're not moving too much out of, this space. And that's wonderful. I love my family. When I go home to visit, it just brings me back to me. But one of the things I do say, they see the benefits for them now of having a therapist in the family, because I clock a lot of stuff, and I'm just like, we fixing to do something with this. And I say that's not typical behavior, or different things like that. But I'm the person everybody calls about everybody else.
Yes.
But then out here.
Yeah.
And I have to keep it all confidential and tight.
Right. You're like a secret keeper. I love it. I love it. And it's so awesome, because like what I think is y'all are not just cycle breakers, y'all are all like cycle starters, which is really awesome.
I like that.
I do
That
too.
cycle starters.
Okay.
Yeah, cycle starters.
Let me write that down.
I did an interview recently with a podcaster named Alyssa Lorena, and she told her story to me about what it was like being raised by a mother with bipolar. And that was one thing that she said was, she's a freaking cycle starter. And I love that. I mean, we've done so much to break cycles, breaking cycles. Let's start some new ones.
That's right.
By doing stuff like this, you know what I mean? And reducing stigma. So,
I agree.
So let me go back to you, Adris. What is, besides something in churches, what is something else? And I'm going to go around to everyone. Just tell me one thing that comes to mind about how we, besides just talking about it, what is one way that we can get solutions to reduce stigma and mental health in the Black community?
I think one of the things that we can do is doing check-ins with people, calling our friends, calling people, our loved ones, and checking in and asking them, are you okay? And be also asking them if they're okay, not just, a lot of times asking how you doing, but actually how are they feeling? Because because a lot of times we just interact with people, how you doing? It's just so we just say like, hey, good morning, right?
Yeah, and everybody lies. Everybody lies all day long and say, I'm fine. Yeah, they're all lying.
But how are you feeling? And then asking that question, and then when they're honest with you, give them the resource and giving them the space to be able to be open and vulnerable with you without judgment. That's what I try to do in therapy when people come to me, because it takes a lot for people to come to therapy. It takes a lot for them to unpack some of those things, especially the Black men that I work with, ex-athletes. It takes a lot for a Black man to come to therapy and then, to unpack those things. So I think if we kind of do that, I think that'll be one of the ways to kind of break some of the stigma.
I love that. And two, as humans, like when someone is expressing themselves, like we feel like we have to do something or say something. And a lot of times people just want someone to listen. We don't have to do anything but listen. And I know like women especially if we're in a relationship with a man and a man comes home and he's had a bad day, we want to fix it. We're all codependent, not all, but some codependent. We want to, fix it and say, well, you should just do this and that. Instead of just validating their feelings, like, wow, that sounds frustrated. I feel frustrated for you. Or just listening, that kind of thing. So, all right, Mr. Danny Ross, what is one thing?
Okay.
You
go ahead.
What is one thing? What is one solution that you can think of that would help reduce stigma?
I think first of all, I kind of want to go through the word stigma.
Yes.
And I was looking at it a lot, and I was asking them, like, what is a synonym for stigma? And what came up was stain, shame, and a scar.
Mm.
I oftentimes think about, we're so ready to attach, our messaging, our narratives to something negative. And I was just thinking about the stigma. The stigma can be something good just as well as it could be something negative, but we tend to talk about stigma when it comes to mental health in the Black community as a stain, shaming. I think part of it is getting to a place to where we're comfortable, and as we're talking here, talking about mental health and really setting up safe spaces where you learn how to not everything to show it on your face. For one, like I have some friends who are not good at not showing how they feel on their face, but that could mean the difference in a counseling session if a client will come back or leave because you're so shocked by everything. And so one of the things we want to do is normalize counseling. And my clients don't want to know what I know. They want to know I care. They want to know that I'm able to apply the knowledge that I know. But do I have to demonstrate on them? No. They just want somebody to talk to and who's going to help them process their stuff. So I think being more available, not necessarily with your credentials and things, but being more available as a person who has empathy and compassion.
I love that. And I love what you said about people's like facial reactions. I have a little bit of problem with that too. But also if you've grown in trauma, been raised in trauma, which most of us have, you're constantly scanning rooms, people's faces. And even if you're not like, having a reaction, people, we're always looking to see, am I going to get hurt? Or if you like, there's abuse, we're constantly scanning, is it going to be a good day or is it going to be a bad day? So I love what you said about that, about like, kind of watch your face. And that was interesting. I had to teach myself how to do that too when I had my child, because my mom's face was always twisted and angry. So I had to like teach, I didn't want my daughter, like her first memory to be of a, of a terrible face. But I love that. Yeah. And being a human and just listening, you don't have to have all the credentials, and creating that safe space. Cause I think that too, like, when people in the past and probably growing up, their feelings have been shut down, or they've have rejection, or there was a consequence attached to sharing how you felt. So I guess what you're saying is kind of, it takes time, right? To build that trust and that safe space for people to do that, right? Okay.
It does.
And all right, Mr. Jared Denzel, what is something, as you've lived it, you've seen it, all of it, what is one thing that would help with this?
Well, I mean, Danny kind of said it. I think not making people feel judged, whether it be by how you talk or the facial expressions. Because I know I've seen people before, like I've mentioned depression, they're like, oh, like all that. I'm like, come on, like this is why we're gonna talk about this stuff now, because I said it and you act like you just saw it go.
Like you're like depression.
I know, exactly. I'm gonna just keep saying it now. Like, it's crazy, but it's like, I feel like more people would be open to talking about it if they didn't feel so judged or try to fix them. I hate that. Like when I come to someone and say like, hey, I'm going through this space right now, or I'm feeling depressed, or my anxiety's real high, was like, oh, well, you should drink some tea and hop on a leg and rub your head. Like, I don't want to hear all of that. Like sometimes if I've come to you, it means I'm comfortable enough with talking and I just want to vent. I don't need you to try to fix me, because half the time you don't know what the hell you're talking about either. So like, just let me get this off of my chest. Stop bugging your eyes out. Stop trying to fix me and just let me talk about it. I think if we just stop being so judgy with each other, we would handle our mental health and our journey to wellness so much better.
Yeah.
Because it's tough to try to be on that journey and you feel like nobody has your back, or you feel like you can't talk to anybody because they're going to judge you. Like, that's awful. So you end up dealing with things by yourself. And if it's a severe mental health issue, you may end up doing something drastic because you didn't feel like you had anybody you could talk to.
Yeah.
And that's such a shitty feeling.
Yeah.
I felt like that most of my life. I think that's why I'm a little bit more comfortable with not making people feel that way.
Good.
Yeah. I know Adris and I were talking the other day about like when someone has cancer and they're healed or cancer free, there's this huge celebration. But there's not a celebration when someone finally finds that antidepressant that works, or those mix of meds that help their, mania, their bipolar. Like, why is that not celebrated when we find a medication that helped our depression or anxiety, or a therapist that they could connect to? Why is that not celebrated? We need to celebrate those things, right?
Yeah, I agree. And just like if your friend were to come tell you, oh my God, I have this lump on my chest, you're not going to tell them not to go to the doctor. So just because, and so a friend comes and tell you, hey, I'm anxious, I'm having all these racing thoughts, I can't sleep at night, or I'm not having got out of bed for the last week. You're not going to tell them just to pray about it. You're going to tell them to go see somebody. So I look at it like, see a provider, see a therapist. We heal just like a doctor heals. We just heal in different capacity.
Yeah. And everyone has not one path to healing. It works for everyone. You got to find your own path to healing. So, well, thank you guys so much. Sorry for all the technical difficulties in the beginning, but I'm actually glad that we just did this privately. And then I'm going to put this on my YouTube and all that stuff, and I'll send y'all things. But I really appreciate, before we end, I want everybody to go around and tell their social media and how they can find you. Adrius, can we start with you and your TikTok?
Okay. My IG is Next Steps with Adris. Same thing for my TikTok. And the name of my agency here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, we service all over Texas, is Next Step Professional Counseling Services.
Awesome. Okay, Mr. Danny Ross.
That's at DLRoss72. That's my Instagram. And also I have the messages.net. Anything related to messages and changing the narrative.
I love it. All right, Jared Keller.
So I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, and it's Jared.Denzel, like Washington, for all three. And if you see me walking down the street, say hello. I don't have an office to reference you to. So if you see me walking down the street, just say, hey, Jared.
Well, if I see you walking down the street, will you please scream the word depression at me as I'm walking by and I wave to you? Please just go depression, please.
Right, exactly.
Okay, thank y'all so much. I appreciate your time.